Recently, I read the most helpful, the most insightful, the most actionable craft book that I have read maybe ever. It's called Stein on Writing. Subtitle, a master editor of some of the most successful writers of our century, sharing his craft techniques and strategies. By Saul Stein. Whew, that is a title. Couldn't memorize it, had to read it off the screen. But it really is marvelous, and more importantly than that, it gave me a firm kick in the behind in terms of my own writing, and as such, I thought I would share it with all of you. It's important for us as writers not to rest on the skills that we've already acquired, having finished a book, or two, or maybe three. Today, we're going to be talking about advanced writer's techniques, the things that make the difference between being a passable first-time novelist and an actual pro at writing. Hello, Shameless Writers. I'm Kristen McTiernan, the Nonsense-Free Editor, here for your weekly dose of writing wisdom. Famed author and editor Saul Stein is unfortunately no longer with us. But during his life, he was masterful at writing and editing both prose and scripts. He wrote 13 books and was the editor-in-chief for Stein and Day Publishers for, I think, about 30 years. Despite all of that, until I was recommended this book, I had never heard of Saul Stein, probably because he didn't have like an Instagram or something. But I can imagine that while he was with us, Saul Stein was an absolute treasure trove of writing knowledge and probably just life knowledge in general. I am extremely grateful that he took the time to record some of his wisdom before his death in 2019. The book, Stein on Writing, is actually very lengthy, and if you're an audiobook person, I highly suggest you get the Audible version because the narrator is wonderful and it makes it go a lot quicker. I also recommend you take notes while you listen. I've dropped a link below, which will take you to Amazon, where you can access it in your preferred format. Because it is such a lengthy book, we're not going to be going through all of it. We're certainly not going to be talking about all of the many examples that Saul Stein included in his book, which is why I recommend you read it for yourself. However, in this video, we will be going through the 4 main points that I found most enlightening and enjoyed reading. Point 1, opening lines and paragraphs. At the time of writing, 1995, Stein informs us that today's impatient readers give a novelist 7 minutes to hook them in. While browsing in the fiction section, a reader would pick up a book, read the back flap, and then no more than the first 3 pages of the book before deciding whether to put the book back or to purchase it. That was 1995. We all know that novelists have even less time to capture the attention in the age of Kindle. Saul tells us that the ideal goals of an opening paragraph are to excite the reader's curiosity, preferably about a character or a relationship, to introduce a setting, and to lend resonance to the story. You can do this in a variety of ways depending on the genre of your novel and the tone. For instance, here are a few opening lines designed to immediately arouse curiosity. 1. I wanted to strangle Mother, but I'd have to touch her to do it. Or, the more benign and genre neutral, it would have been nice if the stork had dropped me down the right chimney. Maybe in your first book you started off with an action scene, thinking that in and of itself, that would be enough to hook the reader. The sound of a gun going off made me break out into a run. Not bad, it's okay. The rest of the paragraph would probably determine whether the reader found it engaging enough to continue reading your book. But it's a mistake to think that action in and of itself is enough to arouse curiosity in the reader. Gun battles and mass shootings are hardly novel, if you'll forgive the pun. So in looking at your opening line, ask yourself, does it convey an interesting personality or an action that we want to know more about? Can you make your first sentence more intriguing by introducing something unusual, something shocking perhaps, or something that will surprise the reader? The key of the first sentence or first paragraph is to entice the reader into needing to know more, either about a specific character or the situation unfolding on the page. My first book fell into this trap in that it required a complete chapter to really draw the reader in, which is probably too much to ask of the modern ebook reader. Write your first paragraph as if it's the only part of the first chapter that exists. This is especially true if you plan to pitch your work to agents, as they need to be dragged kicking and screaming into reading past the first paragraph. Point 2. Making fascinating people. Genre fiction, by its very nature, is more plot-driven than character-driven, so it can be a common pitfall where our characters seem wooden, lack agency, or, worst of all, downright unrealistic. This is a mistake, because while plot may rivet your reader, it's the characters who cause them to love you, or to love your book, more accurately. Think of the huge fandoms out there: Twilight, Harry Potter, or, on the adult side of things, Star Wars. Was it the tightly woven plots and the intricate use of redirection that endeared the readers to the books? No, it was the characters, followed closely by the very specific setting/world building. Readers are seeking connections with the characters, and if you neglect that aspect of your book, your well-done plot will probably be enough to get the reader to finish your book. But will it get them to continue the series or recommend your standalone to a friend? Probably not. In Making Fascinating People, Stein recommends a few tactics to make people more memorable and/or engage curiosity in the reader. The first is to exaggerate in your descriptions, which will make a clear image in the reader's head. As you'll see on the screen, Saul has several examples of this. The first being, "Girl, my fingernails could grow an inch just waiting for you." This tells us that whoever this person is speaking to is late all the time. This is who she is. In the second, it's one character describing another. This distributor has a lawyer so short you wouldn't be able to see him if he sat behind a desk. And he's Yul Brynner bald. When he shakes your hand, you know this dude could squeeze an apple into apple juice. Every time Dino opens his mouth, this lawyer pisses into it. This does double duty because it's not the author talking, it's a character. And therefore, even though he's exaggerating, one, we get a good idea of the guy that he's talking about, and two, we get a good idea of who he is. The second suggestion Saul gives us is to drill down your characterization of a person into one sentence. For instance, "She always stood sideways so people could see how thin she was." Now we know what she looks like, that she cultivates her appearance, and that it's very important to her that people notice how thin she is. One sentence, and we have a good idea about this girl and whether we like her or not. You're not just describing, you are characterizing an action. These are just a few of the techniques indicated by Stein that you can use to instantly imprint your characters onto your reader's brain, making them memorable and distinct from one another. A side issue of my own regarding characters is that if you're writing in a series, to make sure that you give your characters a unique arc from one book to the next. There's nothing worse than having a character go through exactly the same growth pattern in book 2 as they went through in book 1. Yes, we've already learned that Harry is indeed a person worth loving. Why is he learning it again in book 2? Have your characters progress and develop through the entire series, not just in book 1. Ideally, as they progress in subsequent books, you would use who they were in previous books as a point of comparison. Point 3, using all 6 of your senses. I'll be the first to admit that description in general is very difficult for me. In most cases when I read, I actually skip it. I have already formed a picture in my head of what the setting looks like, thank you very much. The notable exception is the novel Atonement, which was so good I refused to skim even one word. One book ever in my whole life was good enough that I didn't skim. So you can imagine how hard a time I have when I sit down to write descriptions of my own. Key is to use the senses to accomplish a secondary goal, instead of simply devoting a whole page to the sights, smells, sounds, feelings, and, God help you, tastes of a person. Ew. You should instead, for instance, use smell to characterize a person. She swept into the room surrounded by her normal cloud of flowery perfume. You could use sound to establish location. The roar of Niagara Falls drowned out all other sounds. Or you could use sight to move the plot forward. When he spotted Meredith's blonde hair and ruby red dress, he walked faster to catch up to her, only to stop as he watched her lean into the tall man beside her and kiss him on the lips. Making the senses perform double duty for me makes description less tedious and more in line with the rapid pace needed in modern genre fiction. And finally, point 4, cut out the flab in your sentences. I hope you'll forgive me for including it. It is a little bit self-serving as an editor, but it's so validating when people pick your thing and actually affirm that it's important. It's very easy as a writer, even an experienced one, to second-guess the intelligence of your audience and over-explain. Or maybe in another scene, you've been dreaming about writing it for so long that you just lean in, belaboring every second of it because you want your reader to love it as much as you do. Maybe they will, but not if you leave it as bloated as it is now. In the next draft, you need to cut out the flab. As Stein says, flab, if not removed, can have a deleterious effect on the impatient reader, who will pay less attention to each word and begin to skip. Skimming, trying to pick out the best parts of text while reading, is as unsatisfactory as trying to pick out the seeds of raspberry jam. So what exactly is cutting out the flab? You've probably heard some of this advice before. Get rid of unnecessary words like very. I don't see any reason to use very in text at all. Do not go skimming through my books looking for veries. You will undoubtedly find them, but I don't use them anymore. Adverbs and adjectives are often problematic. They can be overused and they can be repetitive. So if we're talking about adjectives, for instance, what exactly makes one necessary? An adjective might be a necessity. For instance, if you said, his right eye kept blinking. If you don't keep right, the character might be confused for a one-eyed man. An adjective might stimulate the reader's curiosity, thereby you need to keep it. Example, he had a pursued look. That wouldn't work without the adjective. What, he has a look? What kind of look? Moreover, the adjective raises curiosity about why he has that pursued look. And then there's adjectives that help the reader visualize the precise image you want to project. The spoon left a line of froth on his sad mustache. Without sad, you might be sitting there envisioning Tom Selleck. Tom Selleck is never sad. Ergo, you have failed by not describing your character correctly. Those are necessary adjectives. Repetitive adjectives can be flabby. For instance, the conspicuous bulge in his jacket had to be a weapon, as opposed to an inconspicuous bulge. Get rid of it. It's just bulge. And also get your mind out of the gutter. When I edit people's novels, a lot of my word liposuction involves turning two sentences into one. It's very common, especially in first drafts, for sentences to be overly long or simply inefficient. This creates friction, if you will, however subtly, for your reader, and it might inspire them to skim. Trimming flab is especially important at the end of chapters. As you can see in this image, it's often not a question of good writing versus bad. It's just a matter of making a more impactful ending of a chapter, which will spur your reader to continue on with the book, even if the POV changes in the next chapter. Having strong endings means having strong words and strong sentences, and you get both of those by taking a scalpel to your sentences, or hiring me to do it for you. The short story that I'm actually publishing this month on my premium Substack requires a little bit of work based on what I read in the Stein book. What I realized in reading the Stein book and then going back over my short story, that my main character is kind of flat. She just kind of exists and things happen to her. You know, that thing I tell you not to do with characterization. So while it is mildly inconvenient that I have to go back and tweak an existing story, it doesn't matter. It's best to tweak it, fix it up, do it properly, and then release it. I actually haven't read craft books in a really long time, so if there's a recommendation for one that you'd like to give me, I am very open to hear it. Obviously, Anatomy of Story is not one that you need to recommend because I have read it many times and love it. But I'm sure that there are a lot of craft books that I simply haven't even heard of and that have maybe helped you. If so, drop it down below. So that's all I have for this week. Until next time, take care and write well.